Katara and Azula are two sides of the same coin. This has become increasingly obvious to me, and sometimes it feels like the show is beating us over the head with it. You know, due to some of the imagery and themes. Yet, did anyone else notice this? Wait a minute. Fire lady, opposite of water lady. Oh my god! In all seriousness, the one video I found on YouTube about this topic came out last year, which is surprising to me, considering that there have been so many Avatar video essays and random articles and blog posts at this point. It's basically its own genre of essay writing. Maybe I missed something, which even old veteran fans like myself do sometimes, because back in my day, we had to form our own opinions, don't you know? There was no YouTuber telling us which cartoon was the hottest. We had to conclude that on our own. Anyway, when it comes to these two ladies, we have all sorts of themes and symbolism which add layers of depth and meaning into the overall story. We have the thematic exploration of the true nature of a sibling through their relationship with Zuko, since Katara replaces Azula as the sister he always needed but never had, since due to the tragic events of Zuko's life, his royal sister, his own flesh and blood, became his worst enemy, and his once worst enemy, the Avatar's guardian who stood between him and his honor, the girl he kidnapped, hunted, and fought against for so long, ended up as his true sister. I guess blood is indeed not thicker than water. By the way, my condolences, Zutara fans. I'm a sympathizer of your cause, but only heretics reject canon. My point is, I don't think that it's a coincidence that it was the girls who had the final fight at the end of that fantastic Last Agony Kai scene. The whole time you think things are between an epic sibling duel as brother and sister fight for the throne, the typical royal feud type story. But in the end, the true final battle of the storyline was between the ladies, the two sides of feminine strength and power, as presented in the show. Fire and water, the imperial princess versus the daughter of the tribal chieftain, the mad queen archetype versus the merciful mother archetype, toxic femininity versus positive femininity. And this is a topic not often discussed. I mean, discussions on toxic femininity has been so neglected in the mainstream society at this point that all our bottled up feelings about it just exploded into Karen memes during the global pandemic, which is actually why rational discussion about this topic is important. Not everything should be left to meme magic. I'm not sure what the reception of this video will be. People might hate it, but my objective here is to highlight the positive aspects of femininity by contrasting it with the negative, which is what Avatar itself does, like all good versus evil stories. And I am fully aware that I'm an outsider on this topic, but many female academics comment on negative masculinity all the time. I had to sit through some of that stuff in university, so this shouldn't be a problem, right? There's no double standard, right? And it's also a fact that my lovely female viewers, all 5 of them, have actually requested that I make a video about this. Anyway, as I was saying, these two girls are obvious reflections of each other. They are of the same substance, but from a different angle. Their substance being that of the young female warrior princess type. Is it shocking that Katara is technically the equivalent of a princess? Well, I don't think it should be. Being Hakoda's daughter makes Katara actually a princess if you think about it. Hakoda is the Southern Water Tribe chieftain after all. Katara is the daughter of the leader. If Pocahontas can be a princess, the same principle applies to Katara, who, by the way, is superior to most Disney princesses. I mean, this chick just slept through her own movie. Oh, and there's Moana, who's already basically Disney's version of Katara. I almost forgot about Moana. My point is, these rival ladies, Azula and Katara, are basically the same person, but on opposite sides, and I can prove it. For one thing, they are both born to the leader of the respective nations, as I said before. Azula is of course princess for a reason. Big Daddy is the head honcho, but like I said, many don't realize that Katara fills the exact same role for her own people. Some have mistaken Katara as a peasant because, well, Azula says so, but Azula always lies.
There you are, filthy peasant!
That was just an insult from a princess of a richer nation, not a statement of fact. And Sokka did call himself a peasant that one time, but that was after he was feeling very insecure about himself because, well, teenager in love with the rich girl from the more sophisticated society, whatever. But believe it or not, he was kinda right when he first laid the moves on Yue.
Hi there, Sokka, Southern Water Tribe. You're a princess, huh? You know, back in my tribe, I'm kinda like a prince myself.
Prince of what?
Hey, what are you doing sabotaging your brother's love life, you wannabe plebeian?
But yeah, being the children of the chieftain, they do seem to hold positions of authority in their village. They just seem like nothing special because their tribe is itself unfortunately nothing special. After a century of war, turned it into a tiny collection of huts, it's become so poor that we don't really notice the social hierarchy, and neither do the characters themselves, ironically. Sokka and Katara just see their positions of authority as one that requires work and sacrifice, with no real perks attached. Sokka has to risk his life for the tribe and command the boys, while Katara has to be the village mother and help out with chores around the village. All the while they live in the same shaky shacks as everyone else. However, under different circumstances, Katara would probably have been raised more like Princess Yue, who is the chieftain's daughter of a richer water tribe. This all goes to show that when it comes to class, Katara is in fact Azula's counterpart. They're just on different levels because their societies are on different levels, but they both occupy the same role in their respective groups. And the similarities don't stop there. I can go on all day. Both are prodigious benders. Both are daughters to warriors. Both are 14 years old. Both have older brothers who aspire to emulate their warrior fathers. Both lost their mothers at a young age because their mothers made choices to save their daughters. We all know Katara's mother lied about being the last waterbender to an enemy soldier to save Katara's life, but the lesser known fact is that Azula's mother agreed to her own banishment to save Zuko and Azula, because Ozai threatened to kill them both should Ursa, their mother, ever threaten to challenge him. It happened in the comics. All these things are superficial similarities, I guess. The deeper similarity, though, is how both ladies are young warrior maidens traveling around the world on a mission in the name of their national interests, and both are driven by a profound sense of identity and are profoundly loyal to their respective cultural heritages and values of their respective societies. And not to mention how they're both fierce, they're both determined, they're both wild, they're both indomitable, they're both any other kick-ass adjective. In fact, they both have more similarities than differences, in my opinion. The tragedy of their situation is that their differences are key to make them head in the opposite directions, and these differences force them to collide with each other. A combination of their specific circumstances and the influence that these circumstances had on their own respective choices have forced the two of them to become natural, mortal enemies. One cannot exist beside the other. One is fire, the other is water. Natural, opposite forces. They are the same person, born in different circumstances and conditions. And yes, they have made different choices in their lives, as I'll get into later, but their different choices are ironically due to their similar natures, namely the fact that they are both loyal to their respective civilizations and families which are currently clashing. Samuel Huntington was right all along! Fukuyama is a hack! Anyway, Katara and Azula made decisions based on what their families and cultures wanted of them. And believe it or not, this is actually within the collective imagination of the fandom, despite what I said earlier about not many discussing this in video essays. The popular fanfic titled Distorted Reality plays with this idea perfectly, in my opinion. It's a fan story of Aang going to a parallel universe where the water tribes are the real bad guys conquering the world, while Azula is the young resistance fighter defending her dying culture, and Katara is in this universe the deadly warrior princess of the menacing water tribe, which is a Mongol Viking type of violent, all-conquering civilization in this dimension. And Katara fits the Azula role surprisingly well, actually. She is a girl who loves her heritage after all. What if her heritage wasn't a positive one? What would she be then? Fun fact, evil Katara is more terrifying than Azula ever was. Just imagine this chick conquering little villages by bloodbending her victims. Abominable stuff. Anyway, turns out that the real battle was between these two ladies all along, which is why them having the final throwdown at the end was quite perfect, thematically speaking. Though when I was younger, I was upset that Katara had apparently stolen Zuko's much-needed victory, but now I realize that she didn't. Zuko's true fight was not of him versus his sister, but of his own internal identity crisis, which had already been fully resolved in the episode with the dragons. But Katara versus Azula resolves both their story arcs and has a thematic bang to it. For Azula, it has her beaten by someone she believed as inherently inferior to herself during the height of her comet-induced power, no less, and this offers a much-needed resolution to her story arc, which would not have happened if she had been defeated by a fellow Fire Nation royal. Azula looked down on Zuko too, but because of who he was, a soft-hearted guy. But Azula looked down at what Katara was, a member of a different culture and ethnic group. Katara's victory over Azula crushes the latter's worldview and reveals to her the truth, and which shatters the last vestiges of her sanity. Truly Shakespearean stuff, eh? But cooler. That's why I never fall asleep while watching it, unlike in Hamlet. As for Katara, her victory over Azula resolves her fight against the Force that tried to exterminate her culture and family by having her defeat the very embodiment of that insane, fiery, and all-consuming impulse. Like I said, the great theme exposed here in the conflict between these two ladies is the classic theme of opposite forces clashing. You have the classic fire and ice thing, hot versus cold, summer versus winter, etc. But you also have the less metaphorical theme of the expansionist industrial empire versus the isolated tribe, the society that dominates nature versus the community that submits to nature, the sophisticated civilization with a stratified hierarchy that is run by massive institutions versus the more basic society, which is really just a collection of families. But in my opinion, these are all just meant to highlight the true conflict between these two, which is obviously good versus evil. Though this doesn't mean that fire or summer or industrialization is evil per se, of course not. It's only that the Fire Nation was corrupted or out of balance, as they say in the show, and this corruption at their heart made them use these things for evil. And yes, Azula was evil. She instigated ethnic cleansing. People tend to be more forgiving to Azula than to Ozai, but people often forget.
But it was my idea to burn everything to the ground. I deserve to be by your side.
Yeah, see? Straight from the horse's mouth. The extermination was her idea. Maybe Ozai was doing it all to impress his baby girl. You guys ever think of that? Maybe when he was starting to do the final act, he kept hearing Azula's voice in his head going, "Kill them all, Daddy! Kill them all! You want me to love you, don't you, Daddy? They don't deserve to share land with our family." I'm mostly kidding. But you see my point, right? Anyway, like her father, Azula represents industrialized imperial expansion and is herself represented by heat, summer, and fire. These things are, of course, not evil when by themselves, but when out of balance with everything else, they can literally produce hell on earth. Just ask Californians. Therefore, since these girls are clearly in contrast to each other, one as the warrior for good, the other as the warrior for evil, they also inadvertently end up representing the two different sides of femininity, since after all, Katara and Azula are very much defined by their unapologetic femininity. They don't see it as a weakness. In fact, both of them use it to their full advantage. You have Katara doing shit like this.
That Mr. Yao seems to have a thing for you. Maybe we should go back and see if he'll give us some free Komodo sausages.
Use my feminine charms to take advantage of that poor man? I think you and I are going to get along swimmingly.
And you also have Azula going out,
Your arms look so strong.
Yeah, I know.
Katara and Azula are actually one of the few examples of strong warrior female type characters who are not tomboys, as far as I can tell. They're very girly actually, and Azula might not seem that girly at times, but that's just because she's highly militarized in her manner and composure, but that's mostly because she was born in the warrior class, and she's mostly like this in formal settings. Whenever she's comfortable, relaxing, or in intimate situations, she very much has her femininity clearly on display. The Fire Nation is a classist society ruled by a militaristic aristocracy, which means upper-class girls go through military training according to the hints in the dialogue.
Tell me, what is the daughter of a nobleman doing here? Certainly our parents didn't send us to the Royal Fire Academy for girls to end up in places like this.
So if Katara and Azula are both very feminine characters, one is good and wholesome and the other who is horrible and toxic, then we can expect both characters to demonstrate two different sides of femininity, which begs the question, what is femininity anyway? In our era, it's a pretty nebulous concept, considering anyone can just wake up one morning and decide that they're going to compete in women's sports.
Now that I can compete as female, I'm ready to smash the other girls. I'm gonna roll up the other women here, and I'm gonna smoke them.
But for simplicity's sake, we will go with the normal dictionary definition as opposed to whatever universities are saying these days. So by femininity, I mean the average nature or quality of the people in the female sex. There are exceptions in behavior, we all know, but there is very much an average nature determined by women's distinct biological nature.
There are thousands of studies showing the effects of prenatal testosterone on the developing brain. Even before birth, exposure to testosterone changes the way in which male and female brains grow. There's no way that behavioral differences we see between men and women are purely due to socialization, unless someone wants to argue that the unborn child is capable of learning gendered stereotypes while they are still in the womb. The bottom line is, Environment plays a role in shaping us, but it can't override biology.
And the Azula and Katara characters, I think, are great examples of femininity as displayed by a work of art, which is, by the way, tremendously appreciated by girls and young women in the fandom. The impact these characters had across millions of people is a testament to how they get something right in their portrayal. What does this mean for Azula, though? In my opinion, she's a classic portrayal of the villainous side of femininity, like Lady Macbeth, for example. But you know, an awesome version of that. A negative side to femininity does exist, and I think it's perfectly encapsulated in Azula, in how she acts, how she treats her friends, her motivations, and so on. I think we've all met someone like her, in high school maybe. And though a lot of these traits aren't gender specific, the cruel manipulation, the snobbiness, the falsehood, the going ballistic thing, are things that have been associated with the darker traits of feminine archetypes throughout various cultures. Azula is just the most recent and popular version of the Mad Queen archetype, which expresses this side of womanhood. Or, you know, one recent version of that with a good ending, at least.
I wanted to take out all my anger at him, but I couldn't. I don't know if it's because I'm too weak to do it, or if it's because I'm strong enough not to.
Also, something else we do these days is disregard the true strength of femininity and push the idea that a woman is only really strong when she displays masculine traits.
It isn't sexist to talk about sex differences. What's sexist is assuming that women need to be identical to men in order to be worthy of equal treatment.
A lot of the strong female characters in fiction these days aren't defined by the average feminine qualities we can observe in the average woman, but most of them are tomboy types, you know, a girl who takes pride in not being like the other girls, and that's fine, sure. But I think we're overdoing it and not valuing femininity, in my opinion. But Katara isn't like that. She's a feminine girl with traits common among other girls, and she's not ashamed of that. In fact, she's an essential element of her team, and she shows just how powerful, noble, and necessary these feminine traits can be. And what's interesting is that only a woman, like her, can truly display these qualities to their fullest. It's something a man could never truly emulate, and I think that learning to appreciate these qualities is how we can actually appreciate women. Korra and Toph are a good example of depictions of the boyish girl who displays qualities more common among men on average, though Toph is far more likable in my opinion. Tomboys aren't bad or anything. Saint Joan of Arc was reportedly a tomboy, and she's one of my favorite Catholic saints. It's just that Korra, in my opinion, actually ends up displaying toxic masculinity, ironically enough. I already have a whole video complaining about Korra, so I'll make this brief. She resorts to violence way too quickly, she has difficulty taking criticism, she can't submit to authority, like when she emasculated Tenzin in front of his kids, because she has that wannabe alpha mentality thing going on, where she can't have anyone else in charge, even if they're wiser, and even if she ran away from home to learn from him in the first place. Also, she doesn't really respect consent. One of her instincts is to force herself on other people. She did that with Mako, which is assault, by the way. But also in Season 3, there was that moment with the 22-year-old who wants to live in his mother's basement, and Korra literally tries to kidnap him by force. I'm pretty sure that's another felony, by the way. And I like how Bolin and Mako are more restrained and gentlemanly than her, and they have to literally hold her back as she rages on like a beast to leave the guy alone. Korra is not only masculine, but she keeps displaying the worst traits of a man. Let's face it, she's pretty much one of those douches in high school cartoons.
Come on! Quit playing games. I know you're crazy about me. Marcy told me.
Well, you are big and strong, aren't you?
You know it.
And you think that makes it okay for you to harass me?
Don't walk away from me. What are you, a lesbian or something?
Oh my god, I wish. Would you leave me alone then? Let go of me so I can go find a girl to kiss.
Think about it. She's the stereotypical jock that everybody hates in teen stories, down to being obsessed with sports. She's arrogant, she insults everyone, she slaps people around, she thinks she's hot shit. It's amazing to see all these nerdy fans defending her all the time, but if they met her in middle school, I'm certain she'd give them a wedgie. The idea that we hate Korra because she's a woman kicking some ass is just a cope at this point. You guys want to hear the awful truth? Men in the West have always been fascinated with the idea of women fighters. Even absurdly patriarchal cultures like the Athenian Greeks that hardly let women walk the streets had myths glorifying the Amazons. Of course, it depends on the patriarchy, but I'm a descendant of Christendom, so no, I have no problem with strong women. My ancestors produced plenty. But despite her problems, Korra isn't really displaying the archetypal negative aspects of femininity understood by various human civilizations. That honor goes to Azula. When we first really encounter Azula, beyond any simple brief cameo, it's in the first episode of Season 2, and her debut really says it all. She betrays her brother and uncle in the name of power, and she does so by emotional manipulation and cunning. The episode makes a point to show us how strong she is by making her the first firebender to really produce lightning. But when the time comes to face Zuko, she doesn't use force. She's indirect. She's sneaky. She tells him what he wants to hear, and plays him like a fiddle. Azula tries manipulating Zuko because Iroh is protecting him, and she's instinctively aware of her limitations in the use of force. In this situation, she can't really challenge the grisly old war hero patriarch with more years in battle than she has ever been alive, unless she uses underhanded tactics. So she uses emotional appeal and hones in on Zuko, who is the weakest element. This is an aspect to many women that plenty of guys aren't really aware of. The ability to sniff out vulnerabilities. Women are, on average, very good at reading people's emotional states and picking up on things like confidence, vulnerability, etc. Better than men are, anyway. This is apparently scientifically proven. It's one of the feminine abilities that were talked about throughout history in myths and folklore, but now it's made official in scientific circles. Female intuition, where a woman can discern a person's thoughts and emotions, was found to be partly influenced by an element in women's genetic structure, a genetic structure that is apparently not found in men. Amazing, right? Azula, in a sense, is an exaggerated woman, because she's got all the traits and natural abilities common among human females, but taken to an absurd degree, to the point where she basically has feminine superpowers.
It wasn't me!
Quiet, you!
You're wasting your time. That's not one of them.
How do you know?
Because I'm a people person.
This reminds me of my last ex-girlfriend, by the way. That girl could read my mind, I swear. Masculinity and femininity are broad characteristics that are, on average, more common among men or women. But we don't all have every single one of these aspects. I'm bad at math, and I'm not interested in machines. That doesn't mean I'm going to try competing in women's sports.
The reality is, no one is 100% male or female typical. Think of the average guy. He's probably into a bunch of things that guys like, but he probably has some female typical traits too, and there's nothing wrong with that. Maybe he likes watching sports, but he also likes talking on the phone. And before, I see that you guys are laughing, but if anyone gets upset when this is on the internet, these are gender traits commonly used in the field of social psychology, so you can't call me a sexist for using them as examples.
Also, it must be noted that men can be manipulative too, despite not having those female genetic powers. Like how Ozai manipulated Azula. Men often understand that women, and especially young girls, require affection, and we can manipulate women by making our affection conditional, and thus making the young woman think that she needs to jump through hoops for them to be loved, which is a horrible practice. However, women are better at manipulation because they can pick up on subtle weaknesses more. But yeah, Azula is indirect and manipulative. She dominates in a very feminine way by understanding how people work intuitively and knows someone's insecurities. She says things which has a thin veneer of civility, yet it's done in such a way that she has plausible deniability, enough to gaslight you if you try to confront her. And she manipulates everyone like this, from her brother to her mother to her best friends. Something else we see in Azula, in that first episode, is her tendency towards hyper-disciplined perfectionism. And this isn't something that's a pure personality quirk on her part. When we visit the Fire Nation school system later in Season 3, we see that this was exactly how she was educated, because this is how all Fire Nation kids are educated. Contrary to what other YouTubers have said, Azula is not the way she is because of Ozai's manipulations. I doubt Ozai was involved in her education much. Could you imagine him being the type to read Azula a bedtime story? Like, "Okay, Azula, so the turtle and the rabbit were going on a race, and then the turtle kneecapped that rabbit and won the race, Azula! Be like the turtle!" No. She is like this because this is what her society is like, and Azula is a good Fire Nation girl, just like Katara is a good Water Tribe girl, and it just so happens that the Fire Nation in this particular historical period is horrible, so Azula is horrible by trying to be a good Fire Nation girl that fulfills her society's expectations. It's the whole, the tyrant is the actual puppet of the hidden desires of the masses type shtick, which I think George Orwell explained quite well in that story where the Indians pressured him to kill an elephant. When the Fire Nation girl turns into a tyrant, it is her own freedom that she destroys. Forgive me for my terrible English accent. In fact, both Azula and Katara have a tendency of being defined by their cultural origins more than other characters in the series, and they have less specific individual identities. The Fire Nation is about drive, power, domination, strength, discipline, etc., and the Water Tribe is about family, community, adaptability, love, etc. And these girls reflect what they're supposed to reflect. Heck, in one of the comics, Katara is revealed to have some pretty nationalist and traditionalist tendencies, actually. I know we think of Katara as rebelling against cultural norms and whatever, because of her fight against Paku, when she wanted to learn the forbidden military arts, but she wasn't actually rebelling against her culture. She was rebelling against someone else's culture. Her own tribe had no problem with female waterbenders. That was more of a Northern Water Tribe thing. And this is another point that Katara has in common with Azula, who is also very much a nationalist, but she's fanatic about it. Compare them to their brothers. Sokka's dismissiveness of his own culture is one of his first lines of dialogue, and Zuko's whole shtick is how he is treading his own path and can't fit into the Fire Nation society no matter how hard he tries, because deep down he prefers other values than the ones taught by his militaristic society. And I personally think that this portrayal of Azula and Katara is quite a poignant portrayal. This tendency of women to more reflect social norms, for good or for ill, might be explained by their tendency to be more group-oriented and preferring collaboration and teamwork, while men have greater tendency of wanting to work alone and sometimes have greater difficulty with collaboration. And while Azula is indeed a total bitch, she actually cannot function without a team, and thrives when she's in one. I mean, she goes out of her way to collect her friends so that they can collaborate together on her mission, and they do so with incredible efficiency, even if her relationships with her friends are based on manipulation, gaslighting, humiliation, veiled threats, etc. Azula is still an expert in making them collaborate with her, and she also collaborates with them very well. Until the very end, that is. She's an expert at making people do what she wants, but she does so because she's able to convince them that they need to work with her to achieve success. She convinces them that through collaboration, they can all get what they want. That's her secret to success. And we see her do that with Zuko, when she's not shy at admitting to him that she needs his help. Despite all her faults, Azula is very much a team player, which is derived from her femininity, in my opinion. In fact, when she loses her teammates, is when she starts to unravel, and her team breaks apart because she's selfish and parasitic. Her friendships was built on a foundation of fear and not trust. So it was bound to fail because she's evil, and evil is bound to fail. But her feminine instincts made her able to make it work, at least for a short time. However, let me add the caveat here that in the real world, all male groups tend to perform better in military duties, but Avatar's a cartoon, so it's fine. Anyway, but yeah, I think this group-oriented tendency is one reason why women tend to be the fabric of society and reflect social values more, in my opinion. Men are typically more famous for being the fringe pariah types, you know. Although we live in an era characterized by women who seek to defy social norms in the name of liberation, most of these girls tend to come from universities which are themselves social institutions. So how much are they really defying social norms? Western social norms are based on revolution and rebellion, so the rebellious Western girl is actually just following the Western tradition of rebelling against tradition. We see it everywhere. I mean, popular pop songs and movies made from Hollywood keeps droning in the message that girls have to be rebellious, and then many think that they're actually being rebellious by imitating a Hollywood movie. I mean, no offense. Also in the West, women are less likely to be nationalists, unlike Katara and Azula. But I think, and this is my own speculation, that the reason why is because our nations ironically discourage nationalism more. And since women tend to collaborate more, that means they collaborate more with society, and if society doesn't like nationalism, women will be less likely to be nationalists. Even with the recent events and political movements, nationalism has been very much a fringe in the West for several generations now, and ironically the young men who adopt it become social pariahs. The very nation they're obsessed with rejects them for being too obsessed with the nation. That's actually why I'm not a nationalist. There's no point if the group I'm trying to serve will reject me for it, you know what I'm saying? I'll just stick to normal patriotism. However, in my experience, women from other cultures can get very nationalistic. I lived all over the world, and I have seen this personally. There was even this one case from a female nationalist fanatic creating a social disturbance in this country right here. This young girl was protesting in front of an H&M store because they had criticized the detention camps in that unnamed province of this unnamed nation. She was so bad that the police had to drag her out by force. The agents of the nation state had to fight her zeal for the nation state itself because it was too much. Always funny when this happens. to either men or women. Daily reminder that the nation state doesn't care for your love. It cares for your usefulness, and sometimes your love isn't useful. Important to keep that in mind, which is why Azula's innocence and childhood is crushed by the totalitarianism that she serves. She is used as a tool by the structure that she inherited. Which brings us to the emotional breakdown scene with Azula and her whole haircutting scene.
She's losing it. She's like breaking down, like this is just like too much for her. And she goes nuts and she fucking like cuts her bangs, and like that comes from such a real place, like in the female community. Maybe a lot of you guys out there don't know about this, but a lot of times when women are going through fucking nervous breakdowns and shit, it's just like when they're just going through like some shit, they will go crazy and then they will fuck up their bangs. They're like, I'm gonna cut bangs. You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna cut bangs. And then they like always regret it and they always look stupid and they're always just like, what did I do? No! Like, it's so funny. It's real.
Of course, men have breakdowns all the time as well, but what's happening with Azula though is a typical event in the story arcs of the Mad Queen types, like Medea in Greek myths or Lady Macbeth. I don't think the show is saying that going crazy is a woman's thing, it's just that it's following the whole tradition of her archetypal story. Azula's insanity is the revelation that she tried to control others because she had difficulty controlling herself. The evil king archetype has a similar thing going on. It's a comment on terrible leaders, not a gender thing of chicks be crazy. It's more of an easy lies the head that wears the crown type of situation. But in Azula's case, it is tied to her terrible relationship with her mother, which brings me to my final point about Azula. She rejects her mother and idolizes her father, because she wants power and her father is the embodiment of power. But she also wants to surpass him, so she emulates her father while simultaneously trying to emphasize her own natural gifts. By rejecting her mother, Azula rejects the positive aspects of femininity, such as mercy, compassion, empathy, and she sees them as weaknesses, while embracing a corruption of her feminine side, in order for her to gain an edge in her climb to power, which is why she's dysfunctional. She doesn't understand the true nature of power, because she has a corrupted view of leadership, and therefore Azula doesn't understand that motherhood itself is an expression of royal authority. They don't call it a nanny state for nothing. A true queen adopts her subjects as her children and is loved for it. Violence is not the only means to power. The ability of a princess to nurture those under her authority is objectively more important than the ability to fight, because if there is no gentle and warm home to defend, then what the heck are you fighting for? And this rejection of her mother and this attempt for her to live up to Ozai is one of the things that is really driving Azula insane.
What are you doing here?
I didn't want to miss my own daughter's coronation.
I know what you really think of me. You think I'm a monster.
No, I love you, Azula. I do.
While Katara is much healthier, and coincidentally, Katara seems to emulate and idolize her mother, which fits with her nature more. Azula's relationship with her father manifests these timeless tropes universally common in historical narratives and myths. Ozai, the terrible father, is the archetype of the evil king, who is evil because he dominates and destroys everyone else, and Azula is the archetype of the evil royal lady who manipulates the king into doing these evil acts. Like the fabled Chinese queen Da Ji, she is portrayed in Chinese lore as an evil manipulator who instigates the worst impulses of the emperor and caused a shit show in ancient China, according to the legends. She's very much like Azula, because Azula is a manifestation of feminine power, but she's specifically a manifestation of its misuse for an unhealthy purpose. She brings out the worst in others, as she famously does with Zuko in that one episode. Katara is the opposite. She inspires the best in others. Katara may have a great relationship with her father, but she draws strength from the memory of her mother. For Katara, empathy and compassion aren't weaknesses. They are what give her reasons to fight for. They fuel her determination to do great acts. Katara's femininity is not only perfectly healthy, even if her motherly aspect can annoy some of her fellow team members, but it's also extremely powerful. One of the most powerful forces out there. Hers is the power to maintain a society, or a group, when it reaches its lowest point, like how she rescued her little village after it was left in disarray because of constant attacks, and Katara took on an incredible amount of responsibility at such a young age, and was really a fundamental cornerstone of her own tribe. And there was also that moment in the desert when her teammates were lost and emotionally distraught and out of their element, but it was her. She was the one who saved them. She helped them out. She rescued them, despite her being at her lowest point and out of her element and emotionally distraught as well. She was able to take responsibility in that moment and steel herself for the journey ahead, while the others were basically shutting down. Her presence can turn her team into something more than just a group. She can turn her team into a family, which makes them stronger than they would be otherwise. A key aspect of feminine power is the ability to deal with people, right? And when used in a good and wholesome way, a woman's power can be used to strengthen, help, and guide those around her, as opposed to extract things from them. Women feel emotions more intensely, right? A healthy woman can therefore guide others through their own emotional turmoils, since she knows those waters and she can empathize. She can especially guide men in tough emotional situations, as we sometimes are less accustomed to our own emotional turmoils, and sometimes we shut down in those moments. In times like these, a good woman can be a godsend, in my experience at least. Katara's authority comes from her ability to maintain the group, to sustain and hold it together, but she's able to deal with intense emotional stress because she feels for others and desires their own good, unlike Azula, who requires others to have feelings of awe and fear for her to feel good about herself. Katara is very much defined by her humility, which I have rambled on in other videos, but within the context of masculinity. In Femininity, humility has also another component, in addition to what I've already said in other videos. Since women are so crucial to the fabric of society and so central to interpersonal relationships within a group, a proud woman can be tempted to make everything about herself, to be the constant center of attention. This is also a problem that men have, but like a lot of things between men and women, I think it's expressed slightly differently. A humble woman is still the center and the fabric of the group, but she doesn't need the attention and validation from others. In fact, she's constantly got her attention on the others to see how she can help them, often putting others over herself. You can't do this too much. Balance, right? Don't neglect yourself. You need to make sure that you're good so that you can help others. But selflessness is indeed a virtue. It's no coincidence that cultures produce figures like Kanon as the bodhisattva of mercy. Feminine holy figures such as this tend to be the archetype of compassion for a reason. Cultures have always associated compassion with women. In the West, you have the famous Pietà, the statue of the Virgin Mary, caring for her son, who is now in that moment a broken man. In fact, the Virgin Mary in medieval European lore is a holy figure I know very well, and it's no coincidence that she, as the expression of perfect femininity, is exalted precisely for her humility and avoidance of public attention, which is precisely why entire cultures dedicate themselves to her veneration. It's explained by Saint Louis-Marie de Montfort in his treatise on the true devotion to the Virgin Mary, that her desire to not be the center of attention so that she could dedicate herself completely to others is precisely why she deserves so much devotion. When anyone, men or women, exalt themselves, they are torn down by others. But when they lower themselves to help others, they tend to be exalted. Azula and Katara fighting at the end is a beautiful and climactic demonstration of this. The proud warrior princess, constantly stepping over others, is then taken down by the very warrior princess, mirror image of her, that rose up from the lowest point of history to take her down and rise above her. And this struggle between the two warrior princesses happens when these characters reach the height of what they are. Azula reaches the conclusion of her Mad Queen arc, and she becomes absolutely bonkers by the end there, looking like some sort of teenage anime Harley Quinn, while Katara reaches the apex of the merciful mother archetype by sparing the life of her own mother's murderer and showing care and love to the Fire Nation commoners throughout her journey, unlike Hama, who represents the evil witch, and also what Katara could have become if she had chose differently and was not as virtuous as she was. The two of them clashing is really a battle of the ages, and echoes the idea of the holy woman crushing the head of the snake, because the treacherous viper, or snake, is often a symbol of the manipulative woman. So here in this final episode of Avatar, Katara is the holy woman crushing Azula, who is the snake. Katara's femininity helps her keep in touch with the plight of others and with people, while guys can often get lost in big picture problems and neglect the very real issues felt by very real people. The Painted Lady episode in Avatar is precisely about this. Katara ends up literally tapping into a holy woman archetypal figure to help a dying village of her enemy's territory, by the way, while her brother is too caught up in military and political issues. And this all makes me reflect on how nowadays many people seem to think that we will only really appreciate women or men, if we emphasize what they have in common, and how universal good traits are, and how universal traits are things that both genders have. Often when somebody says something positive about one gender, someone else will bring up how both genders have that positive element, and the important thing is to be a good person and not really care about being a good man or a good woman. But I respectfully challenge that idea. Like I said, there's plenty of evidence of gender differences in how our human attributes are expressed. I'll post some of the studies and articles I've been referencing this whole time down in the description. But my point is, there is nothing wrong with acknowledging that one gender is better at some things than the other. In fact, I think it's kind of beautiful because it emphasizes how we are each other's other half and how we complement one another. Which finally brings me to my conclusion. Motherhood is a specifically female form of authority with very real power, both in its influence over others, since we all have a mama, but also in how it shapes a woman into a strong force willing to fight for something. And I don't mean just biological motherhood. Being a mother figure goes beyond giving birth. Katara is undeniably Team Avatar's mother figure, but it's not like she gave birth to an angry Toph. The mother figure that I'm referring to is one that draws from the specific positive characteristics of femininity, characteristics connected to a woman's natural abilities because it's connected to her physical form, which means that only she can fulfill this role to its fullest. We don't have to see motherhood as something exclusively connected to being a mere caretaker of the household, while the patriarch exercises all the real power, as Azula seems to see motherhood. We can in fact understand what Katara understands, that she, as a young woman, is completely empowered through her motherly impulse, and it grants her authority over powerful individuals, like her travel companions who are basically military nukes in the bodies of little children, but they still rely on her to take responsibility. Her motherly impulse to protect others from threats leads her to a grand geopolitical mission that causes her to affect the lives of future generations yet to come. Motherhood makes her a true leader, and it can be expressed through the other female archetypes, like the warrior princess, since the mother must be ready to fight, or the queen, since the mother cares and has authority over those who need guidance. But the mother figure itself is in fact the source of Katara's strength. So it's not like I'm saying,
Our woman, our queen, if she breathes, she's a god!
a woman could be either one. It depends on what she chooses. Sorry, I just couldn't resist that final joke. Sorry guys. I just couldn't resist. But like I said, I'm looking at this topic from the outside. If any ladies in the audience made it this far, please feel free to tell me your opinions on what I said, and please do correct me if necessary. And of course, thank you all for listening to my ramblings. Have a good day, my friends.